in the other 20 or so youth. I got a problem with that, Art, because according to the Cajun Navy, they have no GPS information on the other two boats, Art. They have no GPS information on the other two boats. Now let's get into this. According to Warren and Nolan's other so-called white friends, they decided to leave the island around 4:30. So they were roughly on White Devil's Horn Island from 11:30 to 4:30. That is about 5 hours. About 5 hours. Now, one question that has to be asked, Art, why did y'all leave so soon? Because they party on Horn Island all day long. Y'all didn't leave at sunset. Y'all didn't leave at sundown. Y'all left.
Ask a mother the worst part. She won't say the phone call. She'll say everything after it. Christine Wansley has spent over a month watching strangers speak for her son. On the morning of July 6th, on a barrier island 10 miles off the Mississippi coast, a body surfaced at the northwestern tip. He was 18. 2 days earlier, he'd gone out on the water with friends to celebrate the 4th of July. Every boat came back to shore that day. His name was Nolan Wells. He did not. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter's office would call it a probable drowning before the investigation had barely begun. Weeks later, a forensic pathologist Wells' family flew in from Washington, D.C., Dr. Roger Mitchell Jr., would stand in front of a room and say something very different. Cause and manner of death, undetermined. 2 examinations. Neither one can tell you how he died. Between those 2 claims, something else happened. A fabricated toxicology report started circulating online. Invented, not leaked, until the state had to step in and publicly deny it existed. AI-generated videos of Nolan's own family began spreading next, until his mother started recording herself, in real time, flagging the fakes one by one, just to keep her son's story from being rewritten by people who never knew him. Attorney Ben Crump is representing the family. District Attorney Angel Myers-McElrath has committed to a grand jury. The state's official autopsy is finished, and it is sealed. No one has been arrested. No one has been cleared. And Nolan Wells, the only person who could tell you what actually happened on that island, cannot correct a single word of it. For over a month, almost everyone with a platform has had something to say about him. This is what we could confirm. This is what we couldn't. And this is where the record, the real one, actually stands. Warren Hudson has known Nolan Wells since the 8th grade. The night before the 4th of July, the 2 of them slept in the same house. By the next evening, Nolan was still on the island. Warren was not. Let's back up and be precise about what's actually confirmed here. On the morning of July 4th, a group of friends set out by boat for Horn Island, a barrier stretch of federally protected seashore roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi coast. No houses. No roads. No power. You arrive by boat or you don't arrive at all. According to public reporting, roughly 30 people traveled out across 3 boats that day. Among them was 18-year-old Nolan Xavier Wells, the only black person in a friend group that was otherwise entirely white. That fact isn't commentary. It's confirmed on the record by multiple outlets covering this case from the beginning. What it means is a separate question, one this video is going to come back to more than once. The group arrived on the island around midday and spent the afternoon there. Sometime later, accounts place it in the mid to late afternoon, the boats left for the mainland. Nolan did not leave with them. Here's the fault line, and we want to be exact about it. Nothing on the public record confirms what happened in the window between the group's last contact with Nolan and the moment they returned to shore without him. Friends have told investigators he chose to stay behind. Nolan's mother, Christine Wansley, and stepfather, Elmore Wansley, have said publicly that the story doesn't add up. Both things exist right now. Neither one has been resolved by anything you could point to and call proof. What isn't in dispute is what came back to the mainland that evening, and what didn't. Nolan's phone and his keys returned with the group. Nolan did not. 2 days later, on the morning of July 6th, his body was recovered near the shore on the island's northwestern tip. Before we go further into what happened out there, it's worth taking a moment to understand who Nolan Wells actually was, because for a month now he's mostly existed online as a photograph and a headline. Nolan played football at Southwest Mississippi Community College, a wide receiver his coaches remember as fast, coachable, and, in the words of one, someone who never met a stranger. He was, by every account gathered so far, an experienced swimmer, an athlete in strong physical condition, the kind of person whose family says the drowning explanation never sat right from the first phone call. Sheriff John Ledbetter's office opened the investigation in the days that followed, initially describing it as consistent with an accidental drowning. Nolan's family didn't accept that framing. They retained civil rights attorney Ben Crump, and District Attorney Angel Myers-McElrath has since committed to presenting the case to a grand jury once the investigation concludes. So here is where the record actually stands at the start. A group of 30 went out to a remote island together. One of them didn't come back. His phone and his keys did. And a month later, the two questions his mother has been asking since the first night. Why did you leave without him and why didn't anyone call sooner? Still don't have answers anyone has put their name to. That's where the confirmed record ends and where everything else, the theories, the accusations, the voices that rushed in to fill the silence, begins. She told the operator she couldn't find her son. She didn't yet know his phone was already back on the mainland, sitting in someone else's house. Let's move past what people have said happened on Horn Island, and look at what's actually been documented. According to a police report from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, obtained by ABC News, several friends who traveled to the island on the vessel with Nolan told authorities that when they left, he was in the company of an unknown female, and that he chose to remain on the island. That's the account on record. It comes from more than one of the friends who were there, and it's the version investigators were working from in the earliest hours of the search. ABC News also obtained GPS data from the boat Nolan rode to the island that day. The vessel investigators and reporting have identified as belonging to Warren Hudson's family. That data establishes a documented timeline for that specific boat's movement to and from Horn Island on July 4th. It's worth being precise here. The GPS record covers that one vessel. As of this reporting, no equivalent public GPS data has been released for the other two boats that were part of the group that day. A separate document, a description sent on July 5th by Mississippi Marine Resources patrol officers as part of the search effort, listed Nolan's physical description and basic information as searchers scanned the island for him. That same reporting cited witnesses telling investigators that Nolan had been drinking heavily earlier in the day. To be precise about what we actually know, that's a witness account relayed to investigators, not a toxicology finding. The state's official toxicology report has not been released. On July 6th, a United States park ranger discovered a body on the northwestern tip of Horn Island. Coroner Bruce Lind confirmed later that day, using dental records, that the body was Nolan Wells. The following day, July 7th, the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office performed the state autopsy. That report exists. It has been completed. As of this reporting, it remains sealed, with officials saying it will stay that way until it's presented to a grand jury. Sheriff John Ledbetter's office issued a statement on July 8th, saying investigators were working to establish the facts, through eyewitness accounts, physical evidence and other reliable information, and asking the public for any photos, videos or eyewitness accounts from Horn Island on July 4th. That's the documented record, start to finish, before anyone's theory enters the picture. A boat's GPS data placing Nolan on the island. A police report describing him staying behind, in the company of someone whose identity has not been publicly confirmed. A body recovered 2 days later. A state autopsy that exists, and that no one outside a small circle of officials has been allowed to read. Every one of those facts is confirmed. Not one of them explains what actually happened in between. That's the gap the rest of this investigation has been trying to close for over a month now, and it's the same gap that, in the weeks that followed, a small group of people would try to fill in very different ways. Some of them wore badges. Some of them didn't. And what they filled it with is where this story gets a lot more complicated. Our thoughts, prayers and condolences remain with Nolan Wells' family. That's what Sheriff John Ledbetter's office said, days into a case they hadn't yet finished investigating. Let's lay out the confirmed chronology plainly before we get into what it means. July 4th, Nolan Wells goes to Horn Island with a group of friends. Sometime in the afternoon, the exact hour isn't confirmed, the group leaves without him. July 6th, a U.S. park ranger discovers a body on the island's northwestern tip. That same day, Coroner Bruce Lind confirms through dental records that it's Nolan. 2 days. That's the entire window between last contact and recovery. And in that window, and in the days immediately after, the framing investigators put on this case set the tone for everything that followed. In the earliest statements from Sheriff Ledbetter's office, the working theory was accidental drowning, no foul play suspected. That's a documented position, not an inference. It's also worth noting what Ledbetter's office said later, once public scrutiny intensified. A statement asking people to refrain from spreading unverified information about the case. Both of those things are true. Both came from the same office. And holding them side by side is where the first real institutional fault line in this case shows up. An agency that reached a conclusion quickly in public, before the investigation had produced anything close to a complete picture, and then asked everyone else to slow down. That's not accusation. That's the documented sequence. It's also not a complaint that's come only from grieving parents or from commentators online. On July 22nd at the NAACP's National Convention in Chicago, the same event where attorney Ben Crump announced the results of the independent autopsy, NAACP President Derek Johnson stood in front of the room and, on the record, accused investigators of mishandling the case. That's worth sitting with for a second. This isn't a fringe voice. This is the president of one of the oldest civil rights organizations in the country saying publicly, by name, that the people responsible for finding out what happened to Nolan Wells have not done their job. He's not the only one who said it. But how loudly, how specifically, and how far some of the other voices have gone since then, that's about to become a much bigger part of this story. Because here's where it gets complicated. Derek Johnson's criticism was measured. Pointed but measured. In the weeks after his statement, that same well of frustration, the same sealed autopsy, the same unanswered questions about the phone and the short stay on the island, got picked up by other people too. Some of them journalists, some of them family. And at least one of them a man with millions of followers, no access to the investigation, and a very different idea of what mishandled means. What Derek Johnson raised was a documented, on-the-record criticism of an institution. What comes next in the story is something else entirely, a viral hour of accusation, aimed not at an agency but at specific named teenagers. We're going to walk through exactly what was said, what holds up and what doesn't. But first, we need to understand the people those accusations actually landed on, because before any of this went viral, they were just 3 of Nolan's friends, coming home from an island without him. Red discoloration in the soft tissue of the back of the head. 5 words in a forensic report, and neither doctor who examined Nolan Wells's body will tell you what put them there. To be precise about what we actually know right now, the independent autopsy performed by Dr. Roger Mitchell Jr., a board-certified forensic pathologist and president of the National Medical Association, did not conclude Nolan Wells was murdered. It didn't conclude he drowned either. What it found was one specific, physical, unexplained detail: discoloration in the soft tissue at the back of his head. Dr. Mitchell's report states plainly that it could represent decompositional changes in the tissue, or it could be from blunt force injury to the back of the head and neck. On its own, that finding doesn't prove anything happened to Nolan before he entered the water. Here's why it matters anyway: it's the one physical detail from either autopsy that no one, not the family's pathologist, not the state, has been able to explain away. We wanted a second, uninvolved opinion on that finding, so we're going to give you one now. Dr. Kendall Von Crowns is the chief medical examiner in Tarrant County, Texas. He has no connection to this case, no relationship with the family, and no role in either autopsy. Asked about the discoloration, he told CNN it could represent decompositional changes of the musculature, or it could be from blunt force injury to the back of the head and neck. Read that again. A forensic pathologist with no stake in this case, reviewing the same finding independently, arrived at the exact same fork in the road Dr. Mitchell did. 2 credentialed doctors. 2 separate looks at the same detail. Neither one can rule out the other possibility. That's not us being cautious for the sake of it. That's the actual current state of the physical evidence. As of this reporting, no named forensic pathologist, on either side of this case, has gone on record saying they know which explanation is correct. Not Dr. Mitchell. Not Dr. Von Crowns. Not the state medical examiner, who has publicly declined to comment on the independent findings at all, citing the active investigation. There's a reason a detail like this is dangerous in a case like this one. It's specific enough to sound like proof. It's medical, it's clinical, it's got a doctor's name attached to it, and none of that makes it resolved. A piece of evidence that's genuinely undetermined can get treated online as if it's already been decided, just because it's disturbing enough to feel true. We're not going to do that here. What we can tell you is that this single finding, 5 words in an autopsy report, is the reason the manner of Nolan Wells's death is still officially listed as undetermined, more than a month after his body was found. It's also, as it turns out, the detail that everything downstream of this chapter gets built on. Because in the weeks after Dr. Mitchell's findings became public, that discoloration stopped being an open medical question and started becoming something else, a piece of raw material. For journalists asking careful questions. And for at least one commentator who was about to take that same unresolved detail and build an entire theory of exactly how, when, and at whose hands Nolan Wells died. We're going to show you exactly what he said next. But we needed you to understand first what the actual doctors, the ones with no theory to sell, are still telling us they don't know. Give me my freaking phone. What are you doing? 9 words caught on a stranger's video from a boat offshore. And for weeks, a lot of people online were certain they knew exactly whose voice that was and exactly what it meant. Here's what's actually confirmed. A video taken from a boat on Horn Island on July 4th, panned across the water and captured audio of a voice yelling that line. It later surfaced online and began circulating widely. Attorney Ben Crump's legal team reviewed the footage and said publicly that they believe the voice belongs to Nolan Wells. That's their interpretation on the record from the people representing his family, not a forensic voice match, not a confirmed identification. A claim, and it deserves to be treated as exactly that. Because there's a second, named on-the-record account that directly contradicts it. Traces Tin Shepard, a friend of Nolan's, addressed the video on Good Morning America. Speaking directly to the moment everyone had been replaying and speculating about, Shepard said plainly, "That's the video and that's her yelling. Not Nolan." That's 2 named people, one legal team interpreting evidence in the family's favor, One witness with her own name and her own face on national television, offering a competing account of the same 9 seconds of audio. We're not going to tell you which one is right. Nobody outside that boat actually knows, and anyone telling you otherwise is guessing. What we can tell you is that this is what a real contradiction in this case actually looks like. 2 named sources, 2 accounts, both on the record, genuinely unresolved. It's worth sitting with why that video spread the way it did in the first place. A young black man, alone in an all-white friend group, on an island he never came back from. A video with a voice demanding a phone back was always going to get read as evidence of something. And maybe it is. But sounds like it could be something, and confirmed to be something, are not the same claim, and this case has already shown what happens when that distinction gets lost. A fabricated toxicology report. AI-generated videos of Nolan's own family. Now a 9-second audio clip, contested by the one witness willing to put her name on a different explanation. This is the pattern this case keeps repeating. A detail surfaces, it's disturbing enough to feel conclusive, and the space between claim and confirmed gets erased by how fast it travels. We're flagging it here specifically because what's coming next in this story is going to test that pattern harder than anything so far. A commentator with a platform in the millions took this same case, the same sealed autopsy, the same unresolved discoloration, the same disputed video, and built something out of it that goes a long way past what Trace's Tin Shepherd said, or what Crump's team has claimed, or what any named investigator has put on the record. Before we get to what he said, we needed you to see clearly what a genuinely contested claim in this case actually sounds like. 2 names, 2 accounts, neither one proven. Because what comes next doesn't look like that at all. 2 doctors. 2 boats worth of currents and testimony. And after 5 weeks, exactly 2 explanations for how Nolan Wells died are still standing on the actual record. Neither one has been ruled out. Neither one has been proven. Let's put them next to each other because this is the moment that matters. According to the Marine Resources Incident Report in Chapter 3, witnesses told investigators Nolan had been drinking heavily that afternoon, and that he chose to stay behind on the island, in the company of someone whose identity has never been publicly confirmed. Horn Island sits 10 miles off the coast, exposed to currents that locals and search and rescue crews describe as genuinely dangerous, the kind that have pulled strong swimmers under before. Put those 2 pieces together and you have scenario 1. An athletic, capable swimmer, drinking alone on a remote island as the tide changed, caught by a current he didn't see coming. Nothing about that scenario requires anyone to have done anything to him. It requires only the water and bad timing. And according to Dr. Roger Mitchell Jr.'s independent autopsy in Chapter 5, backed by the outside opinion of Dr. Kendall Von Crowns, there is a second, physical detail that Scenario 1 has never fully accounted for. Discoloration in the soft tissue at the back of Nolan's head, which 2 separate credentialed pathologists have each said, independently, could be from blunt force. Put that detail next to the fact that his phone and keys came back to shore without him, and you have Scenario 2. Whatever happened to Nolan Wells on that island wasn't only the water. We want to be exact about this because it's the whole hinge of the case. There are 2 and only 2 scenarios the actual documented record supports right now. Not 3. Not the version where 30 specific people are guilty of something. Not the version where a single friend orchestrated a cover-up with a staged phone call. Just these 2, an accident or an injury nobody has explained, and as of this reporting, no named investigator, no named medical examiner, and no named witness has produced anything that closes the door on either one. That's not a satisfying place to leave a story that's already gone on for 5 weeks. It isn't supposed to be. The state's own autopsy is finished and sealed. District Attorney Angel Myers-McElrath has committed to a grand jury, and grand juries take time. Sheriff John Ledbetter's office has said little publicly since the independent autopsy results came out. For a case with this much public attention, official silence is not a small thing. It's a vacuum. And vacuums do not stay empty. That's where the official record stands. What happens next is that the silence around it gets filled by someone else. Because 5 weeks in, with no arrest, no clearance and no public update from investigators, a man with a following in the millions decided he'd stayed quiet long enough. What he said next didn't stay inside these 2 scenarios. It went a long way past them, naming names, assigning blame and building a theory of exactly what happened on that island, hour by hour. Some of what he raised, it turns out, checks out. A lot of it doesn't. We're about to walk through all of it on the record so you can see exactly where the line is. I stayed away from Ferguson. I stayed away from Baltimore. That's how Dr. Umar Johnson explained a month of silence, right before breaking it for over an hour. On August 8th, Johnson appeared on a podcast interview publicly available on YouTube, and spoke about the Nolan Wells case at length for the first time. He's a doctor of clinical psychology, a motivational speaker, and one of the most followed and most polarizing black commentators online. Someone whose platform reaches millions with no formal role in this investigation at all. To be fair to him for a second, some of what he raised isn't new and it isn't fringe. The unanswered questions about the phone and keys left behind. Why the group's stay on the island was so short. Why the call to Nolan's mother didn't come until 11 that night. Why the state autopsy remained sealed more than a month later. Those are the same questions NAACP President Derek Johnson raised on the record in Chapter 4, and the same ones Nolan's own family has been asking since the first week. That overlap is real and it's worth crediting. But here's where we have to be precise. Some of what he raised checks out against the record. Some of it we could not confirm anywhere. And some of it goes well past anything any named investigator or medical examiner has put on the record. What checks out? 3 of Nolan's friends, Warren Hudson, Jack Spatalo, and Morgan Seymour, have retained defamation attorney Edward Andrew Palcic, who has represented Donald Trump, alongside local attorney J. Tyler Cox. A legal defense fund organized by Warren Hudson's father, Dr. Benjamin Hudson, has raised roughly $159,000. Ann Warren's stepmother, Judge Ashley Cole, has received threats serious enough that one caller was arrested. All 3 of those facts are independently documented, not just claimed by Johnson. What we could not confirm, specific assertions about which tissue samples were or weren't available to the independent examiner, the exact scope of what investigators did or didn't examine across all 3 boats, and details of a coach's account of speaking with Nolan that afternoon. Each of those needs its own sourcing before it could be treated as fact, and as of this reporting, none of them have one. And Watt's theory, stated as his own framework, not corroborated by any pathologist connected to this case. A specific window for time of death, a scenario involving the body being held before it entered the water, and an interpretation of the discoloration finding from Chapter 5 as evidence of a specific injury. No named medical examiner, not Dr. Mitchell, not Dr. Von Crowns, not the state, has said any of that on the record. Now the widening circle. Here's what's confirmed. Hudson, Patalo, and Seymour were with Nolan on Horn Island that day, and they've retained defamation counsel in direct response to public accusation. Here's what's reported but unconfirmed. Any claim, from Johnson or anyone else, that a specific person caused or covered up Nolan Wells's death. Warren Hudson was the direct target of Johnson's central theory. We're not restating that theory here. No investigator has substantiated it, and repeating it isn't reporting it. Which brings us to the other side of this collision. Hudson, Patalo, and Seymour's attorneys have said publicly they're prepared to pursue defamation claims against anyone who spreads unproven accusations about their clients. That's not us taking a side. That's the documented reality Johnson's video walked directly into. A case with no arrests, no clearance, and now 2 sets of lawyers. Hundreds of people stood outside a church in Ocean Springs to say goodbye to a boy the internet had already turned into an argument. Before the theories. Before the podcast interview. Before the legal funds and the defamation attorneys, there was a mother standing in front of a casket, trying to bury her son in a case that wouldn't let him rest. Nolan's funeral was held in Ocean Springs, the town where he grew up, where he played multiple sports before becoming a wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College. Hundreds gathered. Attorney Ben Crump and Reverend Al Sharpton were there alongside the family, and both used the moment to renew their public call for accountability, for anyone in a position of authority to finish this investigation and tell this family the truth. Christine Wansley has said publicly and repeatedly that the family has so many questions. Not accusations. Questions. Why he was left. Why it took as long as it did for anyone to call her. Why, more than a month later, she still doesn't have an answer she can trust. She said it on social media, in interviews, standing next to her son's attorney at a national podium in Chicago. It is, at this point, the most consistent thing anyone connected to this case has said from the very first week to now. That consistency matters because almost nothing else about this case has stayed still. In the same month his family has been trying to grieve him, Nolan Wells's name has been attached to a fabricated toxicology report. To AI-generated videos of his own relatives, circulated until his mother had to start correcting the record herself, one post at a time. To an hour of accusation from a commentator with millions of followers. To a legal defense fund raising 6 figures on behalf of the friends who came home without him. His mother has had to do all of this, bury her child and simultaneously serve as the fact-checker for her own son's death. That's not a detail. That's the actual cost of what happens when an investigation goes quiet and the internet doesn't. Here's where things stand today, all of it running in parallel, none of it resolved. The state's autopsy is complete and remains sealed, with officials saying it will stay that way until it reaches a grand jury. District Attorney Angel Myers-McElrath has committed to that referral, but no date has been set. And now there's a new layer that didn't exist a month ago. A legal environment shadowed by defamation threats on more than one side. Warren Hudson, Jack Spatalo, and Morgan Seymour's attorneys prepared to pursue claims against people spreading unproven accusations, even as Nolan's own family continues pressing for transparency they say they still haven't received. A sealed report. An unscheduled grand jury. 2 sets of lawyers, circling a story that still doesn't have an ending. That's what's actually pending right now, while a mother in Ocean Springs tries to figure out how to grieve a son whose death has become public property. She didn't ask for any of this. Not the fake documents. Not the AI videos. Not the podcasts, the fundraisers, or the retainer letters. She asked one thing back in July and she's still asking it now. What happened to my son? Nobody with the authority to answer that question has done so yet. Everyone else has had plenty to say instead. Somewhere in a locked filing cabinet in Jackson County, there's a document that could end this entire case in one sentence. Nobody outside a small circle of officials has read it. We've spent 9 chapters walking through claims, accounts, theories, and one very loud hour of accusation. Before we go any further, let's be precise about what's actually confirmed here, what's still just a claim and what's pure theory, because at this point in the case, that distinction is the only thing standing between an investigation and a mob. Confirmed. The independent autopsy commissioned by Nolan's family concluded that his cause and manner of death are undetermined, pending investigation. That finding comes from Dr. Roger Mitchell Jr., a board-certified forensic pathologist and president of the National Medical Association, and was released publicly by attorney Ben Crump on July 22 at the NAACP National Convention in Chicago. Confirmed. A legal defense fund for Warren Hudson, Jax Patalo, and Morgan Seymour, organized through Give Send Go by Warren's father, Dr. Benjamin Hudson, has raised approximately $159,000, according to the fundraiser's own public documentation and multiple outlets that have independently verified the total. Confirmed. Judge Ashley Cole, Warren Hudson's stepmother, received threats connected to this case serious enough that at least one individual was arrested in connection with them. 3 facts. 3 names attached to sources you could go verify yourself right now. That's what confirmed actually looks like in this case. Not because we're withholding judgment out of caution, but because these are the only things anyone has produced actual documentation for. Claim. The account that Nolan chose to stay behind on Horn Island, in the company of an unnamed acquaintance, comes from a Mississippi Department of Marine Resources incident report, relaying what several friends told investigators. That's a real document on the record, but it's still secondhand testimony collected in the earliest hours of a search, not a confirmed account of Nolan's own state of mind. Claim. In his August interview, Dr. Umar Johnson made several specific factual assertions, about which tissue samples were available to the independent examiner, about how thoroughly investigators examined the other 2 boats, about a coach's account of speaking with Nolan that afternoon. Each of those is a claim individually, and each one needs its own independent source before it could move up this ledger. As of this reporting, none of them have one. Theory. Johnson's specific time of death window, his scenario involving the body being held before entering the water, and his interpretation of the discoloration finding as evidence of a particular injury, all of that is his own framework. It is not corroborated by Dr. Mitchell, not by Dr. Von Crowns, not by the state medical examiner, not by anyone with a medical or investigative role in this case. It may turn out to be right. Right now it's a theory, and treating it as anything more than that does a disservice to everyone still waiting for real answers, Nolan's family most of all. Here's why this ledger matters more than almost anything else in this video. A case like this doesn't just need the truth to eventually come out. It needs the public to be able to tell the difference in real time between a document and a guess, because for over a month plenty of people haven't bothered to. A fake toxicology report didn't get flagged fast enough. AI videos of a grieving mother spread before anyone checked. And somewhere underneath all of it, a sealed autopsy is still sitting in a filing cabinet, waiting for a grand jury that hasn't been scheduled yet. That's the confirmed record as of today. Everything else is still just a claim wearing the confidence of a fact. There is a report that already answers the one question that matters most in this entire case. Everyone has read theories about what's inside it. Nobody outside a small circle of officials has actually seen it. Here's what's still pending, and here's exactly who's responsible for each piece of it, because a case this important deserves more than we're still waiting. The state autopsy. Completed on July 7 by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office, and sealed ever since. The office has said only that it was performed in accordance with the standard procedures and protocols followed for all autopsies, and has declined to comment further, citing the active investigation. It stays sealed until it's presented to a grand jury under District Attorney Angel Myers-McElrath. As of this reporting, no date for that referral has been set. That's the single document most likely to resolve the fork this case has been stuck on since Chapter 7, accident or something else, and it's sitting behind a lock only the DA's office can open. The investigation itself. Sheriff John Ledbetter's office out of Jackson County has said little publicly since the independent autopsy results were announced in July. We don't know, as of this reporting, whether Warren Hudson, Jax Patalo, Morgan Seymour, or any of the roughly 30 people on Horn Island that day have been formally interviewed by investigators. That's not a claim that they haven't been, it's a gap in the public record that only Ledbetter's office can close, and so far they haven't. And now, a new thread that didn't exist a month ago. Attorneys J. Tyler Cox and Edward Andrew Paltzik, representing Hudson, Patalo, and Seymour, have stated publicly they're prepared to pursue defamation claims against people spreading unproven accusations about their clients. No lawsuit has been filed as of this recording. If one is, it becomes its own case, one that could, for the first time, force some of these competing claims into a courtroom, under oath instead of a podcast or a comment section. That's a real, named, pending legal thread, and it's one worth watching closely, regardless of which side of this story you find yourself believing. 3 open items. 3 specific parties who could close them. A district attorney holding a sealed report. A sheriff's office that hasn't said whether the people at the center of this were ever formally questioned. And a legal team, one filing away from turning accusation into evidence, tested in front of a judge instead of an audience. Here's the honest truth about where this leaves us. Everything in this video, the confirmed record, the disputed claims, the theories that don't hold up, all of it is downstream of 3 people's decisions. Angel Myers-McElrath decides when a grand jury sees that report. John Ledbetter decides what his office says next and to whom. And somewhere in a law office, a decision is being made about whether to turn a public argument into a legal one. Until one of them acts, nothing here actually changes. The autopsy stays sealed. The theories keep circulating. And Christine Wansley keeps waking up every day without the one thing she asked for back in July. Not sympathy, not attention, not millions of views on her son's name. Just the truth. Whenever someone with the authority to release it finally decides she's earned it. Ask a mother the worst part. She won't say the phone call. She'll say everything after it. We open this video with those words, and a month later they're still true, maybe truer now than when we started. Nolan Wells was a strong swimmer. Every account of him says so. His coaches, his family, the people who knew him before any of this. 10 miles off the Mississippi coast, on a stretch of federal seashore with no roads and no shelter, that should have mattered. According to the official record, it may not have been enough. According to an independent autopsy that still can't rule out something else entirely, maybe it was never just about the water at all. 2 doctors. 2 possibilities. Neither one closed. That's the loss this story started with. But it isn't the only one. Because somewhere in the last 5 weeks, this case lost something else too, the space to simply not know yet. A sealed autopsy sitting in a locked office became a blank page other people rushed to fill in. A 9-second clip of someone yelling on a boat became, to different people, either a confession or a friend defending herself, with no way for most viewers to tell which. A physical detail 2 independent pathologists both called genuinely unresolved became, in one commentator's hands, a murder weapon. And 3 teenagers who went to an island with a friend and came home without him became, to millions of strangers, either grieving kids or suspects in a cover-up, depending entirely on which video they happened to watch first. None of that filled the silence with truth. It just filled it with certainty, competing, incompatible, and, on both sides, unproven. Somewhere in Jackson County, Sheriff John Ledbetter's office still hasn't said whether the people on that island were ever formally questioned. District Attorney Angel Myers-McElrath still hasn't scheduled the grand jury that holds the only document that might actually answer this. And in Ocean Springs, Christine Wansley is still doing something no mother should have to do this many weeks after burying her son, correcting the record about his own death, one fake video and one unproven claim at a time. We told you at the start of this video what we could confirm, what we couldn't, and where the real record actually stands. That record hasn't changed since Chapter 10. What's changed is how many people have decided they already know how it ends. They don't. Not the commentators. Not the lawyers. Not us. Nolan Wells went into the water off Horn Island on July 4th, and something happened to him there that, more than a month later, still doesn't have an official answer. Everything else, every theory, every accusation, every certainty you've heard shouted with total confidence, is still just that. A theory. Shouted with confidence. The truth is still sitting in a sealed report, waiting for someone with the authority to open it.